part of the gift for me of having a child with intellectual disability has been just that I have been forced every day to reckon with the intrinsic ableism inside me. That has transformed the way I exist in the world, but I think it has the power to transform everybody else who is not with someone with a disability daily. But some of that is just knowing someone. Some of that is putting yourself in a space where you can encounter people whose lives are different than yours.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Go to shiftingculturepodcast.com to interact and donate. And don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app to be notified when new episodes come out each week. And go leave a rating and review. It's easy, it only takes a second, and it helps us find new listeners to the show. Just go to the show page on the app that you're using right now and hit 5 stars. It really is that easy. Thank you so much. You know what else would help us out? Share this podcast with your friends, your family, your network. Tell them how much you enjoy it and let them know that they should be listening as well. If you're new here, welcome. If you want to dig deeper, find us on social media at Shifting Culture Podcast, where I post video clips and quotes and interact with all of you. Previous guests on the show have included Sarah Bessey, Kayla Craig, and Sharon Hottie Miller. You can go back, listen to those episodes, and more. But today's guest is Micha Boyett. In addition to Blessed Are the Rest of Us, Micha Boyett is the author of Found, a story of questions, grace, and everyday prayer, and a contributor to the New York Times bestseller, A Rhythm of Prayer, edited by Sarah Bessey. She is co-host of the award-winning The Lucky Few podcast, creator of the Slow Way podcast and newsletter, and has written for publications such as The Washington Post and Christianity Today. In addition to her work as a writer, she is a part-time youth pastor at Good Shepherd Church in New York City. Boyett lives with her husband and their 3 sons in New Jersey. As we enter into this conversation, Micha shares her story of finding out her son Ace would be born with Down syndrome and the subsequent years of raising him. Through her story, she uses the framework of the Beatitudes found in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount as a way to embrace the limits and longings that she has been given. We talk about how the Beatitudes help redefine human worth and value through Jesus' teachings of blessing the marginalized. Micha discusses ableism, grief, suffering, spirituality, following Jesus by loving those on the margins, and living more slowly in today's fast-paced world. So join us as we learn to embrace our limits and longings so that we can enter the full life of flourishing. Here's my conversation with Micha Boyett. Well, Micha, welcome to Shifting Culture. Really excited to have you on. Thank you for joining me.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having me, Joshua.
Yeah, this book, Blessed Are the Rest of Us, How Limits and Longing Make Us Whole, is absolutely fantastic. You did an incredible job. And I know, when I have authors on, I know how much work goes into these books and how many years goes into it. And to have it be birthed is quite an accomplishment. But this one feels very, very special. And to bring in the Beatitudes and to bring in what is our posture like towards Jesus in the midst of suffering and difficulty and the everyday of life, I think is fantastic. So well done. Good job.
Thank you so much. That just makes my heart flutter. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I would love to just start out with your story, as you've written a lot of this book, as you're taking the Beatitudes as a framework as you're walking through, but also sharing a bit of your own story as well in the midst of it. So using your own story and the Beatitudes together. So take us into that. Where does this start? Where does your story start? And how does that intersect with these blessings of Jesus?
Sure, yeah. So most of the story of this book is about the the birth and the life of my youngest son. I have 3 boys, and 9 years ago, when I was pregnant with my youngest, I had an experience that happens actually to a lot of women, where you go in for your ultrasound and the doctor comes in concerned and says, there's a marker here for Down syndrome. We think we should test. Now, I had this happen to so many friends in my 10 years where everybody was having babies, that I almost barely let myself think about it. I was sort of like, yep, this happened to this person and this person and this person. Everybody's fine. So I took a blood test, and 2 weeks later, I picked up the phone when the geneticist called me back. And this shows you how much I was not concerned. I tend to worry a lot, but somehow there are things in my life that I don't worry about at all, and which causes problems. But I am walking to gymnastics class in San Francisco, where I lived, pushing my little toddler in his stroller. And I pick up the phone, and this stranger I didn't know told me that the child I was carrying had Down syndrome, would have Down syndrome. And it was, I think there's just those moments in your life when you are like, here's where my life is going. And then everything stops. The whole thing turns around. You start walking in a different direction. And that was what happened for me. I had a real season of grieving and trying to understand what I was grieving. I had been a person who'd grown up around people with intellectual disability and loved them. And I think that also shocked me, that I grieved, that I was not ready, set, go with this new life that God was offering me. And then my son was born, and he went from being, and I can remember the very moment he went from being a diagnosis that I was terrified of to being a person I knew and loved. And it was when I looked in his face and said, "Oh, it's you. It's you. I know you." And this book is about not necessarily that season of finding out that my son would have Down syndrome, but all the seasons after, of learning how to live beside him in this world, in a world that often doesn't want him, in a world that often doesn't make space for him, that is afraid of him. And as I started to enter into that world with my eyes opened to what people believed about my son, I needed to redefine what I believed about myself and about my son. And I found a way forward in the Beatitudes. I found Jesus setting up his entire ministry and saying who matters most in the world. And I realized in the process that the way that I had thought I mattered was by what I did, by what I achieved, by how impressively I showed up in the world. And that in living that way and believing that way, I was living opposite of how I wanted the world to see my son. So it was a transformation of myself too, from a life of seeing my worth from what I did to seeing my worth from my belovedness and from God's delight in my humanity.
Yeah, that's the really most transformational things that could ever happen to us as humans is moving from our worth from what we do to who we are as a beloved child of God. And how does the Beatitudes place us in that place? How did you get that hope from saying, oh, this is what Jesus says about those who suffer and mourn and all of these things? and that theirs is the kingdom. How did that help you realize your belovedness and move away from saying, I am what I do?
That's a great question. I think as I began to learn how to be Ace's mom, Ace is my youngest son with Down syndrome, I needed to redefine a lot of things. And one of the things I needed to define was what makes us human. And I think that process of working through that question was a really deeply spiritual process for me. And I think I knew in my gut that the way that Jesus lived in the world was always pointing to the worth and value of my son. But I think it took me a while to find the Beatitudes as my textbook for this new way of being. Jesus gives his Beatitudes twice in the Gospels. Once it's before his Sermon on the Mount, which is the longest recorded sermon in the scriptures of Jesus, and his Sermon on the Plain, which is almost the same, except that it takes place on a plain instead of a mountain, which I think is really funny. And, some scholars think that this is maybe like Jesus had a few talks he gave, like maybe this is a talk he gave in one place and he gave a talk in another place, and they showed up a little bit different each time. But before he gives his Sermon on the Mount, and this takes place at the start of his ministry, he almost has this little poetry riff. And it's like a poem when he gives his Beatitudes. And, a little about the background of what he's doing there. This is a Greco-Roman oratory tradition where speakers would stand up in front of people and say, I'm going to tell you how to live the good life. I'm going to tell you how to be happy. And they would start reciting how to be happy. And it would be about virtues, like do not steal from your neighbor and keep your word. And, all these things of like, yes, that makes a person a good person, And Jesus stands up, takes this same tradition that people would know and recognize and says, I'm going to tell you how to live the good life. I'm going to tell you how to find true human happiness. And I'm going to tell you that it belongs to these people. It belongs to all of you who are poor or poor in spirit. It belongs to all of you who are grieving. It belongs to those of you who have no power or who give up your power. It belongs to you who are showing mercy, to you who are longing for justice. Like this list of not virtues, but list of pain, list of the human experience. And, we may not be experiencing everything on that list at the same time in our lives, but we will move through that list in different ways. We will all grieve. Hopefully, we will all be given the chance to give up our power for the sake of another person. Hopefully, we will live out this longing for justice. And the reason I found Ace in that was because I saw Jesus centering the people who were not being centered in the world, and still centering those people through these words. This is a poem that says, here's the people who get to live the life that God dreams of. And it's all of you who don't think you're living the life that you dreamed of. It's this incredible invitation that is sometimes really confusing, but I think also has the potential to transform us.
It will transform us. It's been really beneficial for me as I've been walking through those things. But as we look at the Beatitudes, one of the things that, even in the title of your book, blessed are the rest of us. We talk about that word blessed. A lot of times it's just a platitude of blessings, and we don't really know what that actually means. And I like that you use the Greek throughout your book to help us reframe and rethink what blessing is and what being blessed means. Can you reframe it for us so that we know what this is, and it's not just a really surface level platitude that we give each other.
Yeah. It actually is funny and a little bit embarrassing to me that blessed is part of the title of my book.
I know. I was going to say that, but I didn't want to.
Yeah, I promised myself like 15 years ago I would never use the word again. It is such a trite phrase and like this vaguely religious, quasi-spiritual term that people usually refer to for like getting a great parking spot and their kids making straight A's and never talking back and, having their team win the Super Bowl. And the thing that has always driven me crazy about that word is just what it assumes about God and what it assumes about us. And it's this idea that like I'm going to somehow be good enough that God is going to make my life easier. And when we live that way and believe those things, then when people come into our lives, like my son, whose life is not easy, but it's good and beautiful. It is hard when you have this view of blessing to know what to do with that. I also think there's like, I don't know, after Ace was born, I kind of experienced two different kinds of people. I experienced the people who were concerned with his reality, with his existence, who were sorry, who were... I actually had someone ask me soon after he was born, just like drop off at school, why I decided to keep him. And it is, a shock that people feel comfortable saying that kind of thing to a new mom, but also really revealing about the way that people think about disability in our culture. So I had that experience. And then I had this opposite experience that was kind of like the boomers on Facebook sending me memes about how Ace was an angel, like here to inspire us all. And there was a lot of, I don't know, that made me feel icky too. It didn't feel right for me to hear from people that they were so happy that I had this angel baby who was going to teach everyone how to be happy. And both things were denying his humanity. Both the rejection or seeing him as a burden on society and the part that says he's an angel. Like both were rejecting the fact that he is actually fully human and fully loved and fully himself. And so I think that idea of blessing was difficult for me when I came to the Beatitudes. I really loved the things Jesus was blessing people for, but the fact that he was blessing was was concerning to me. And I had, I'm a Bible nerd, so I had a lot of fun researching and just was delighted when I found Jonathan Pennington's scholarly work where he talks about this word, and I'll probably say it wrong because I'm no Greek scholar, but it's makaroi, and that's the plural. Singular is makarios, and it's the word that Jesus uses for blessing, and we've translated it blessed, but it would be a more accurate translation probably to say something like true human happiness or the flourishing life or wholeness. And that felt really important to me to single in on that what we think of blessing is not what Jesus was intending in this poem. He's intending to tell us what it means to find the really real, the true thing underneath the surface of how we live. And and that is what true human happiness and flourishing looks like.
And you just blew by it really quick, the really real, but and also the dream of God. Some of the things that you've helped you redefine what the kingdom of God is that, it's God's dream for the world. That's what is really real. Beyond the facade of this fallen world that we live in, it's what is the kingdom. And I think that's helpful for us as we're walking in. What does it look like to have flourishing? So as you're now entering into the space where you have your son and you have Ace, and he is on the margins, on the outside of society, as you've said, there's two reactions to this human life that you have with you, the son that you have that you love, that is fully human. How do we move from seeing people as marginalized to actually then centering the marginalized? How do we get to that posture of moving towards centering instead of seeing people as other and othering people?
Yeah. I am part of this podcast with two other women who are also moms of kids in the Down syndrome space. And we talk about every week that our goal is to shift narratives and to shout the worth of people living with Down syndrome. And that is a really complicated thing to do because, I think I referred briefly to ableism, but ableism is deep in us, and it has not, I think as a culture, we have been, a lot has been revealed in the last 20 years about the prejudices we hold. And thankfully, there's great conversation happening around race. And there's not as much conversation happening around the prejudice that we all carry with us when it comes to people who are living with disability. And in my experience of loving someone with disability, it's intellectual disability. And, when I talked about seeing my value and my worth as based on what I could do, even in my relationship with God, of how could I please God? How could I be the right person? Even that view of life is an ableist framework. It's this way of seeing ourselves as only worthy because what we can do. And then when we encounter people who can't do what we can do, we don't know how to respond. It's scary to us because we have lived our lives finding our value in this very particular way of being alive. And I think part of the gift for me of having a child with an intellectual disability has been just that I have been forced every day to reckon with the intrinsic ableism inside me. That has transformed the way I exist in the world, but I think it has the power to transform everybody else who is not with someone with a disability daily. But some of that is just knowing someone. Some of that is putting yourself in a space where you can encounter people whose lives are different than yours. I have down the street, we moved 3 years ago to New Jersey. And we happened to move into a house where a block away, there is a home of people with and without disabilities living together. And it's called cohost. And it's this inclusive living situation. And one of the things the founder talks about is that in most things, most of what we think of as group homes where adults with disability are living independently or living with caregivers, is those group homes are on the outskirts of town. You have to, everybody piles into a van and drives somewhere to go experience an event or whatever. And typical people rarely run into people with disability, because people with disability are living on the outskirts of town. People with disability are going to specific work spaces that are not in the heart of the community. And one of the things that Cohome wanted to do was put a house right in the middle of the historic district of my town, walking distance to the coffee shop and walking distance to the grocery store, and for people with disability to be front and center, to be seen, to be valued as members of the community. And I think that is the kind of thing that changes all of us. People with disability are marginalized because those of us without disability are not seeking them out. And there are so many people, if you don't know anyone with a disability, it's because you're not looking and you're not centering them yet. But start centering and you'll see them.
Yes, as you go, just to be able to be next to people, to see them for who they are, for their humanity, it changes us, right? That I think any of these conversations that we have of, I don't know, even political arguments of, this, whatever it is, whether it be immigration or race or disability, whatever it is, once we have a relationship with people and we see them and we know them and we're involved in proximate space with them, it changes us. And so we have to get outside of ourselves and we have to move towards something different. And the thing, when I lived in the Middle East, it shocked me how much behind centering the disabled they are, even in the Middle East, right? That all the disabled are hidden away in people's homes, and they are just left in corners. It's very, very sad of what is happening. And there's a long ways that we have to go in America to be able to do that and move people forward, to see people for who they are. And man, it's a necessary thing. One of the things you talked about briefly is the beginning when you were with Ace and you realized that he is going to have Down syndrome, and you got that call and you started to grieve and you didn't know why you were grieving or what you were grieving, because you still have this person. And sometimes we grieve, a loss of something that we never had. One of the things you say in your chapter on grief in the Beatitudes, blessed are those who grieve. And you have it here. They will be invited to a divine banquet. And I just want to read this. It says, the invitation to the banquet of grief throws open the doors of suffering to reveal the kind of flourishing known only to those who have gone out with weeping and step back through with shouts of joy. How is that possible, to walk through weeping and suffering and stepping back in with shouts of joy?
Wow. I love that. I love that question. In the book, I write about grieving the pregnancy that I thought I was going to have, right? The child that I thought I was going to have. In the process of writing the book, I lost my dad to just, a horrible brain cancer that came quickly and painfully. And I think what I've learned about grief in that process has been that you don't walk out the door with grief and then leave it outside and then come back in with shouts of joy. You go out the door with grief, and what you gather is you gather that into the shouts of joy are gathered in the same arms as the arms where you're still carrying the grief. The grief doesn't go away, especially if the grief is a relationship that you don't get to have in person anymore. Like losing my dad, I grieve because I love my dad and I don't get to have him with me. So I don't leave that behind, but I find in the person of Jesus and in the restoration that the hope we have gives us, that we we can walk a path that brings us back to joy, that joy can walk along with us. I think it's a mystery, and I think joy is a mystery too. And I think the gift of our faith is that we aren't asked to put down one for the other, that we get to hold them together. And it's in the same way as I feel about my life of raising Ace. There is a lot that I long for him. And in this book, I talk a lot about longing. I want life to be easier for him. I have grieved several things along the way in his life, and the thing that I have cried the most for is the speech that has never come for him, and that he is still unable to talk, unable to say, to call me mama. And that doesn't mean I don't find utter delight in him. I was just with him at therapy this morning, and his therapist, he was supposed to, it was like physical therapy. So he's supposed to be getting like a massage in these places. And he just kept sitting back up and hugging her, just like, just like attacking her with hugs. And she's like, Ace, I really got to rub your back here. And that is like, my life is full of that joy of knowing him and what he has to offer the world. And the grief is still there. It's still hard. I have a friend, Heather Avis, who does the Lucky Few podcast with me. And she always says, hard is not bad. It's just hard. And I think that's good.
It is good. We just lost my mother-in-law. She's lived with us for the last 7 years. And so she passed away, the end of January. And, I have a 6-year-old, and he's only known, a home with his grandma living with him. And now she's gone. And so it's heavy right now. So that's why I'm entering into that grief place of like, okay, Jesus, are the ones that grieve, are we really blessed? Do we actually get the joy on the other end? Is it wrapped together? Is that possible? Or are we just, in the midst of a vacant space where our home feels empty? And so is he there? Is he going to meet us in the place of grief? Are we truly blessed? Is that true? Those are the questions that, you ask when you're actually suffering and when you're grieving and when it's not going right and correct. But I know that I've seen people who have suffered the most become the most joyful people that I know. And why do you think people who suffer well and cling to Jesus in the midst of suffering have joy?
Richard Rohr somewhere talks about for us to picture a circle as ourselves, and there's like the core of us straight in the middle, the bullseye in the middle of that circle. And a lot of our lives, we live on the edges. And, part of that is how we as humans learn how to survive in the world. We need to live on the edges, the surface of our lives, so that we can get the things done that we need to get done on our checklists, that we can feed the people and clean the house and get our jobs done. And it also is how we learn to survive in a world with people. The surface is how we say, I'm fine, how are you? And, we mostly live our lives there. And the invitation of Jesus is to move from those edges to the core. And I think one of the things that is so beautiful about the Beatitudes is that Jesus is sort of dividing the Beatitudes into this idea of our limits and our longings, the things that we dream of for ourselves and the people we love, and the things that we know we are limited by whether it's our grief that's limiting us or our power or our ability. I think that the limits and the longings of our lives are the way we can move to the core. I think they're kind of like these little arrows that are showing up on the edges, inviting us to ride them down to the middle. I think that what Jesus does when we talk about in our suffering, in our sadness, in our pain, that we're finding hope, is that there are these opportunities to ride that limit, to ride that longing down to the core of who we are. And this some kind of mysterious alchemy that happens when we are honest about those things, and when we long for hope and we long for joy, and we let it play out, because God works in a slow way. But in that process, the transformation is happening in the core and not on the edges of us, so that when it finally rises out, it rises from a place of wholeness and not surface level. We're not talking about the person who paints on a happy face to appear to be like satisfied in Jesus. Yeah, we're talking about real transformation inside that leaks out.
And that's why I love at the end of this Sermon on the Mount, as he tells the parable of the wise and foolish builder. It's about hearing the words of Jesus and putting them into practice. That's going to build your house on the rock, so that when all of this happens, because the storms will come, either your house is going to crash because you were foolish and you didn't actually put the words of Jesus into practice, or you're wise and you actually did, and your house is going to stand when the storms come, and you could actually weather those storms with Jesus because of the practice of this. And one of the things that you wrote is what Gregory Boyle says about the Beatitudes. They're not just a spirituality. It's more about a geography. How do we place ourselves in the geography of the Beatitudes? And what does that mean? And what does that look like to place ourselves in a place and not just in a thought of this is a good platitude?
I think the call of a follower of Jesus is to move toward those who are living in the spaces of the Beatitudes. So if we are following Jesus, then we're following Jesus toward the poor in spirit. We're following Jesus toward those who are living with injustice. We're following Jesus toward the grieving. And I think that looks different in all of our lives. But I think we know, as we recognize who we are, where we are, what we are gifted in, we know what it might look like for us to move toward those who are experiencing poverty, who need to receive mercy. Yeah, it's a geography because it's the geography of humanity. And we're invited just like Jesus invited the people who were sitting in front of him when he gave this sermon. We're inviting people to wholeness.
So for us, what does that look like? I know you talk about that practically, for what that looked like for you at your church in San Francisco while you were on elder boards and trying to be inclusive of the LGBTQ plus community. That there was some practical ways of actually centering those on the margins, right? That you say we should do this as a church. How do we, when it's difficult and it's hard and there's opposition and people, that it's not always going to go perfectly in every sphere of what you're doing. How do we enter into it and actually enter into the place of going towards those and say, hey, you are loved, you are a child of God, and we're here with you. How can we do that?
Yeah, the story that I tell in my chapter on peacemaking is about this season of my life when I was on the board at my church and we were making a decision to become a church that was affirming to the LGBTQ plus community. And that was that was the messiest thing I've ever been part of. It was and as most church pain it goes, as most things when the church that you love is in turmoil, the church is a lot of humans trying to figure out what it means to love God. And we can come to different conclusions. And to me, my calling in that moment and still was to be an ally to the queer community, to be part of a church that wasn't afraid to risk risk what people thought about the way we were reading scripture, risk what the assumptions are, and to do that for the sake of those who have been, clobbered by the church, the LGBTQ community that has been rejected, kicked out, unwanted, has been told that God doesn't love them. And in making this change in my church, it wasn't that the people who disagreed with me were hateful. It was that we were reading scripture in a different way. But that was choosing to read scripture in a different way is a very painful thing to happen to a community. And it was also a gift for me because I got to suffer in a way that I don't think I would have suffered if I hadn't been leading through that. And it gave me a taste of what my LGBTQ siblings have gone through. Just a little tiny taste, because I know I don't know what that experience is like. But I experienced a lot of rage. There was a lot of pain. And all that to say that when we are in the church, when we are following Jesus, it's going to be messy. It's always going to be messy. I learned from professor 20 years ago that when we read the Bible, we put on Jesus glasses and we read it through the lens of Jesus. And that transformed me. And also it made life a lot messier. And that's a gift. That's a gift. There's still a lot of pain that exists from that falling apart of my church community. But also, I say falling apart, also that church community is a beautiful, vibrant thing that looks really different now. And that is beautiful too. And so I think Jesus does a lot of things that are messy and beautiful, painful and joyful, all the things at once.
I mean, that's helpful for us to figure out we want to find a way to be faithfully like Jesus, to embody Jesus in all that we do. What does it look like, for me, because I have a lot of Arab Muslim friends, like my centering, especially in America, is for Arab Muslims and immigrants, refugees, to be seen and known and said that they are beloved children of God as well. Because we all have some sort of enemies for some reason. And so whether it be immigrants, whether it be LGBTQ plus people, whether it be ACE that has Down syndrome, how do we have the eyes of Jesus in those situations and circumstances? And I think that you're right. It is the belovedness of all of us and every human that has existed that are beloved children of God that will change the way that we see humanity, people around us. And it will change the way we interact in the world, and we love others well. There's something you say, at the end, for me, the Beatitudes themselves have been a good posture. I have come, into a place of we're thinking about the things that we do for Jesus as like Jesus has called us to obey his commands. So we're doing things for him. The Beatitudes for me help me like, this is the posture of who I am in the midst of that.
Yeah.
That I have limits and longings, and I could have this posture so I could walk into what it looks like to follow Jesus because of this posture. I think Mark Scantrat really helped me in that, as like he helped me with the postures that I could take with the Beatitudes. The end of your book, I want to read something to you. Like, man, I've highlighted a lot in your book, just to let you know. So
thanks.
That's one of the ends. We who follow Jesus may never transform the whole story of the world into one in which all justice is restorative and all people have access to health, community, and joy. But we could follow Jesus towards that end, living with the hope that all things will be made new. How do we long for hope when we know that we're only going to get partial justice here on this earth?
I think we as a culture live in a time where we have seen so much change so quickly in terms of technology and the way humans exist with each other, that we who are alive right now don't move according to natural time. Like we live in an alternative time. We live in a time machine that is just speeding and speeding and speeding and speeding. And one of the reasons I love reading the ancients, reading what the saints have written over the past 2,000 years is that I'm allowed to see faith from the perspective of someone who lived in a really different world than I live in. And one of the things that we see is this slower way of being in the world. And I think that if we were in the natural world more, if we paid attention to the way that I'm thinking right now of the daffodils that are popping up in my backyard, the way that plants grow and bloom and go back to the earth and their seeds, like, go back into the ground and the next thing comes up, and it's a regenerative, restorative world in the midst of death and pain. Some of what it means to believe that God is making all things new and will be making all things new is to live in that slower perspective, to step back from the way that we exist with our technology and speed and our to-do lists, and receive that the work of God is happening and the work of God will keep happening. And we will be here for a bit, and we are invited to our tasks at the moment. We're invited to long for justice. We're invited to show mercy. We're invited to be misunderstood for doing good. And because we are not going to be here that long, we can kind of let go of having to see everything change all at once, but believe that it's changing, and it will.
Yeah, that's good. My wife has been quoting this. There's a quote from Marshall McLuhan back in the 80s. She's been quoting this to me a lot lately. But he says, the greatest discovery of the 21st century will be the discovery that man was not meant to live at the speed of light. And I think, I think he's right. This is not the way that we're meant to live. No. We're meant to go, as you said, from the edges into the core of who we are. And that's the slow, transformative work into the image and likeness of Jesus over time, that these limits, these longings that we have will start to shape us and form us into what it looks like to follow Jesus, what it looks like to be like Jesus, to embody him in the world, that these are things that are good for us. Is there a limit in your life that you thank God for now?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind with my limits, maybe I'm learning to thank God for. I had 4 years ago, 2019, Ace and I fell down these stairs together outside of his school. he ran at me for a hug, and I went back. And I was able to save his little head, but my head took it. And I had about 6 to 9 months of trying to recover from this concussion, and then I would bang my head again. It was like I had no spatial awareness. And it has turned into pretty terrible chronic migraines. And I spend a lot of my life managing that, like, taking preventative medications, going to whichever helpful, like, doctor is going to help next. And that has been a limit that I'm still trying to make peace with. I end up in bed more than I want to be in bed. I end up being the mom who's like, Mom can't help this morning. Mom has to stay in bed. And still, when I am laying in my bed in pain, every once in a while, I get this spark of, this is a gift, and I'm learning how to rest after a lifetime of thinking that I needed to learn how to rest. And, sometimes we are forced into it, and that doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's fun. It doesn't mean it's even great for my family, but I am learning something. And I think even if I continue to have these kinds of migraines and spend time in my bed for the rest of my life, I think I'll get there of being grateful. I think I will.
Yeah, hope so. We long for that place of gratefulness.
Yeah.
Micha, what's one hope you have for your readers, the people that read your book?
I hope that my readers who, I hope they come to this, whether they connect with disability or connect with parenting or connect with the things that I'm talking about, that they would find in the Beatitudes something fresh and alive that they haven't found in their faith so far. I really want people to ask the question of what it means to be whole and what it means to be moving towards wholeness. And I think that's my hope, that question is being asked, and that question is leading to other questions. It is not so complicated, and even as it is really mysterious.
I have a couple quick questions. If you could go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
I would tell my 21-year-old self that God isn't mad at her, that she is deeply loved, and there's nothing more that she has to do to earn that love.
Beautiful. Beautiful. We all need to hear that.
Yeah.
We all need to hear that. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
Oh, boy. What have I been reading? I just finished reading Sarah Bessey's Field Notes in the Wilderness, which is wonderful. Wonderful. Yes. I just picked up Savannah Guthrie's new book on faith, and I've been pretty intrigued by it. It's called Mostly What God Does. Things I've been watching. This is not very exciting, but my family is watching old Survivor episodes together. So we've jumped around, but this is our 4th or 5th season that we're watching, but we just got to season 2. So very exciting.
Nice. Isn't it great to have something to watch as a family and walk through them? It's kind of fun.
And people to yell at from the couch.
Yeah. That's good. Well, Sarah Bessey's book, Field Notes for the Wilderness, fantastic. I love it. It is wonderful. Incredible. So that was really good. And, I've heard many good things about Savannah Guthrie's book. So really would be interested in checking that out as well.
Yeah.
Micha, thank you so much for this conversation. Where can people find your book? How can people get it? And where would you like to point people to?
Yeah. You can find Blessed Are the Rest of Us really at any bookseller, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, that I love to go to bookshop.com, where you can support independent bookstores.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So yes, I would love for people to pick it up. And I think that right now Baker Bookhouse is having 40% off of my book. So and that's my publisher, if you want to go to Baker Bookhouse and see if you can grab it on the cheap. And in terms of finding me, I'm on Instagram at Micha Boyett. I also have an Instagram that is an advocacy account where we talk about Down syndrome and autism. And that's with my son, Ace. Ace Face is my friend. You can also find me at the Lucky Few podcast, where I, along with Heather Avis and Mercedes Lara, have a podcast about Down syndrome advocacy. And then I have a Substack called The Slow Way that is spiritual practices.
Nice. Beautiful. Well, Micha, thank you so much for this conversation. Fantastic. I really want people to enter into living within their limits, their longings for what God could do here on earth, and then look at the Beatitudes as our geography, as our place that we can enter into, that is a posture that we could take, that we could not just follow the ways of Jesus, but that we could also do what Jesus did and center the marginalized and get things back to the core of who we are, to go through that slow transformation process so that we could see all people as beloved children of God and see their humanity no matter what, whether it be the disabled or the marginalized in other areas. So thank you, Micha, for this conversation. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
I'm delighted we could have it. Thank you, Joshua. This is fun.
Thank you for listening to the show today. If you're really enjoying the show, please don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app. You could do it right now. Just hit that little plus. And then I would love it if you would leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. So you could go right now to the show and leave a star rating and review, and let us know how you are enjoying the show. And find us on Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to connect, interact, I post a lot of quotes and different things that you could actually interact with the episodes and let me know how you are enjoying the show. If you feel inclined to donate, there is a support the show link in the show notes, and it would send you directly to a page where you could donate so that new episodes can be produced for your enjoyment. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have an incredible week.